So Russians are winning this war. This is the Western Source interactive map. So they have captured Lysychansk, and actually this whole gap has now closed as well. They are a few days behind because they get their information from Ukrainian officials. But what we've been discussing about in the past few weeks, that Russia is winning, is becoming more and more obvious now and cannot be hidden anymore. The problem is when one side cannot accept defeat. And we don't know, of course, how this war is going to end because Russia may be winning, but there's still some way to go. What is the Ukrainian plan? The Ukrainian plan, and what Boris Johnson told Zelensky when he flew to Kiev just to convince him to continue with the war, is they got hundreds of thousands of new recruits ready to throw into the fire. And what these soldiers need is training and weapons. And that's what Boris promised Zelensky. And that seems like, a legitimate idea, so to speak. Russians are fighting with an expeditionary force in Ukraine. They're not mobilized, they've got huge reserves, and it is quite possible that hundreds of thousands of soldiers, if they are trained and weaponized, then they could probably manage to stop the Russian onslaught. The problem is that the Russians are now have the Ukrainian army on the run, and it's quite possible that the Ukrainians may not be able to stop this development. Which brings us to the next problem. The West have made it very clear, because they've got some very hard-headed people over there, that it would be a complete catastrophe if Russia were to win this war. So they cannot allow this to happen. So how do you stop it if just sending in weapons and money and whatnot isn't doing it? What else are you gonna do? Of course, a NATO intervention, because the hardheads like Liz Truss, von der Leyen, whatever, Boris Johnson, the U.S. leadership, they can never accept a Russian victory. So that leads. I mean, you'd think that one side winning a war leads to a resolution, but in this case, leads to a dead end. And so we have a huge problem here because Russians are indeed winning. So there's another problem as well. So Zelensky won't go down without a fight. NATO have a reason to intervene, not just to stop Russia, but also because they would be basically betraying Zelensky if they didn't. Because NATO they try to pull Ukraine into NATO and are also preparing Ukraine for war. And they cannot turn their back on Zelensky when they've promised him victory. Remember when Zelensky was on the negotiating table with the Russians back in March, and Boris Johnson pulled him out, and he and the West have done that many times since then. They've been making sure Zelensky doesn't do anything other than just continue with the war. So if Russians just keep advancing and Zelensky looks into a crushing defeat, he's going to call them all out. He's going to call them out. He's not going down like that. He's going to say that these guys promised me weapons, they promised me sanctions, they promised me this and that, and now they are just sitting there looking at us getting destroyed and are doing nothing. So it's, I think, the most likely scenario, if Russians continue with their success, is that we're going to have a NATO intervention, and um, I should not have to point out how dangerous that is. And this is this is just the result of all the escalation created by the West. They've made this uh, they've made this a stand and fight situation, and no where losses, only victory will do. But the problem is that the Russians have the same issue here. The Russians cannot lose this, and I said it many times that this is an existential war for Russia. Their reasons for conducting this operation have been made clear by them many times now. And that's the only things they ever wanted. Of course, the West will tell you that no, they won't stop there, no, they want that, this, and that, and this, just. But the reality of it is they don't want NATO here, and they also want to protect the Russian speaking population. And so they will not accept defeat either, except they're winning. And if you don't understand what protecting the Russian speaking population against ethnic cleansing by nationalist government backed up by the West means, um, let me give you an idea of what's going on there that you are not being told. If only I can find it. Yeah.
at all. I just thought you guys might like it. We're gonna real quick down here, and we're seeing really heavy shelling over the last few days, and this is something I'm starting to see.
This is the city of Donetsk in Donetsk People's Republic.
Some of like the footage of it.
The Ukrainian army has been shelling the city, not military targets, and killing civilians for weeks now. Um, I specifically chose this clip because it shows bombing with multiple launch rocket systems. This is obviously no targeting of military infrastructure because these are notoriously um, dumb weapons. They are saturation weapons. They saturate an area. They don't have the accuracy to hit a specific target inside the city, no less. And so, even the HIMARS MLRSs that the US sent, the first thing they did is drove them to Avdiivka and started shelling Donetsk. When they send in the 155 millimeter artillery pieces, the Ukrainians sent them to Avdiivka and started shelling Donetsk. So this is obviously a war crime that takes us back to World War II and what nationalists did back then. And it's not even acknowledged by the West. It's not happening. Of course, you can find many evidence of that on YouTube. Not just the multiple launch rocket systems, but also the constant artillery shelling. But I think this is the most telling clip to be launching multiple rockets against the city. And the Western civilized world is looking the other way and backing up the nationalists. Russians cannot lose this one. Imagine if the Ukrainians were managed to stop the Russians and then drove them back and capture all these territories back. Imagine what they would do to the local population. So it's not happening. These are lost and lost forever. The problem is what happens here when the Russians get closer and closer, and when the Ukrainian army breaks, which may already have done. We can't be sure at this point. We'll find out soon enough. And I'm afraid that the West are just not ready to deal with it. And so we are in a bit of a pickle. So catch you on the next one, and we'll see. The future will show.